Thank you so much for being able to have me here. I'm going to be speaking this morning about Persuasive Pro-Life. It's actually the second book that I wrote. When I started my work at Catholic Answers in 2012, the first book I wrote was a book on atheism because I felt like Catholics did not have a really solid approach. There were a few books written by Catholics responding to the new atheists, but I felt like they were a little bit thin on the philosophy and sometimes high on sort of the caustic attacks, which is understandable because the new atheists back then were pretty obnoxious. What's funny is the new atheists from 10, 20 years ago, now the current atheists absolutely can't stand them. So you have people like Richard Dawkins, who says, actually a man is a man and a woman is a woman. I'm a biologist. And the new atheists tell the new atheists, you're excommunicated. You can't say stuff like that. That's heresy. And Richard Dawkins is like, wait, what's going on? And I'm saying, hey, welcome to the party, pal, to quote John McClane there. Then the second book I wrote was Persuasive Pro-Life because I wanted to have a single book to help walk people through how to talk about the issue of abortion. I did pro-life apologetics for a long time prior to working at Catholic Answers through a wonderful group called Justice for All. We were half Protestants, half Catholics, young college students, going around the country, dialoguing with students on university campuses, because we believed the way that you change this issue, you need to change the laws, but before you can change the laws, you have to change people's hearts. You have to change people's minds on this important issue, and you have to do that by engaging people in dialogue. And so that's what I did to engage others, and we always thought like this is just our little part, everybody's involved in their little part to try to change the culture. And then seeing, one day, hopefully one day in the future, many, many, many years from now, maybe the laws will change, maybe Roe versus Wade will be overturned. I remember I was doing that work back in 2008, 2009. And, I am, unfortunately, a pessimist. Not a pessimist, I'd consider more of a realist. My wife is the bubbly, extroverted optimist. She handles all the joy in our household. When we are lacking joy, she has a surplus of it to give. Until finally when the kids are too much to bear, then even she will joyfully crack. But that's where I step in to help to balance it all out. But I thought it would just be a very long time. I thought maybe my children would see Roe versus Wade overturned, but I didn't think that I would. That's why it was just such a shock just a few years ago. I remember being on my phone looking up the SCOTUS blog. I was refreshing the blog that day when it was announced the Dobbs decision had overturned Roe, and I remember I was just waiting, I wanted to hear it, and my 2-year-old is bugging me saying, Daddy, jump on the trampoline. And I said, no, I can't pay attention to you, I have pro-life work to do. I look at him like, no, okay, so I'm on the trampoline with him, and I'm jumping, and I'm looking at my phone like a typical terrible millennial parent, which is why Gen Alpha is so messed up, probably. Refreshing my phone, and the SCOTUS blog comes up, and I didn't know if the case was going to be up that day. And the first case that came up was just something really boring about Medicaid. I was like, forget it, I'm not going to do it today. Then I go back up to my bedroom, and our bedroom, and I get my computer, and I say, well, it is Friday, and to remember from movie Office Space, this would be bad news for a lot of people, and they usually like to do that on a weekend, so they don't have to deal with the fallout. So I log back in one more time, and then I just see it. Roe and Casey are overturned from the Dobbs decision. And I just couldn't, it just felt so very surreal. And since then, I think sometimes as pro-life advocates, there is a little bit of a sense of dejection after that. If this has been a goal, first thing I did was I called my mentor, John Jakubczyk. He was the former president of Arizona Right to Life. He was the guy that got me involved in this 22 years ago. How that happened was, his daughter asked me they had a tiny Catholic school, only 20 people in the high school. So everybody said, find a date for prom that doesn't go to this school so we can have 40 people, we can have a real prom. And then she invited me, and then I met John, and I'm a convert, so he became kind of a surrogate Catholic father, and he showed me the ropes, and I go over to his house, and he showed me pro-life videos, and kind of mentored me to do this. And I just called him, because I never thought I didn't think I would live to see the day, I didn't think he would. There are people who have been fighting this since before Roe, since back in the 1960s even. So it could be it can be hard then afterwards seeing ballot initiatives, for example, consistently either pro-life ones fail or pro-abortion ones succeed at the ballot box. And you can feel, and seeing the way that the country is, like, have we failed? No, we absolutely have not failed. But you have to keep things in perspective. In overturning Roe, we basically got 90 yards down the field. You didn't think that the other side was going to pick up some yards after that? Or if you poke the bear in the eye, do you think the bear isn't going to do anything? You see, prior to Roe versus Wade being overturned, the strategy of those who are pro-choice advocates was just to ignore abortion. Ignore it. Absolutely ignore it. When I would try to arrange public moderated debates, we had a debate, it was before Roe was overturned, at the Emory University Medical School. It was going to be a debate. The pro-life medical students sponsored it. They brought in a pro-abortion philosopher. That's actually on my channel. You can go and watch that. And he agreed to do it. But the pro-choice medical students refused to co-sponsor the debate. My opponent, reached out to them and said, hey, we need to debate this. This is important. And they said, we don't debate this issue. There's nothing for debate. We don't talk about this. That was a pattern I saw time and time and time again. Just don't talk about it. Don't debate it. Don't do anything. We win. We've won. They had the status quo. Don't do anything. And now they see they have to do something. And it's not so much a failure of the pro-life movement, but the situation we're in now, because we have to keep in mind that I live in the state of Texas, for example. I used to take my kids to pray at abortion facilities there. And now I can't. And it's an amazing, cool feeling that there's no place for me to take them because it's illegal. And the sky isn't falling, there isn't anarchy, cats aren't marrying dogs, the world isn't falling apart, we just have things normal, but guess what? You can't go get a surgical abortion. Planned Parenthood is shut down there. Similar, you have this restrictive laws in Florida, in Georgia. It's just some issues don't do as well at the ballot, but I think that overturning Roe did reveal something for the pro-life movement, and we have to accept a sobering fact. And the sobering fact is that for 40, 50 years, a significant percentage of our movement have been pseudo-pro-lifers. They're pseudo-pro-lifers. They're pro-life in name only. They're pro-life in the sense that they like saying they're pro-life. They like being part of the pro-life community. They like being part of a church where they say they're pro-life, but they've never had to do anything. They actually secretly think abortion isn't a big deal, but they like belonging to the pro-life tribe. And they've never been tested, so it doesn't matter. But then when they're tested, when they have to actually go to a voting booth and people will tell them, if you vote for this, it's going to have this consequence, they crumple. They crumple under the test. They didn't really have the pro-life convictions. They were pro-life in name only. In comparing the pro-choice and pro-life movements, that's a unique problem to us. There's a significant number of people who say they're pro-life, but when they go to vote, they actually vote pro-choice. That's a serious problem we now have to address that shows we're actually a lot weaker than we thought. And that a lot of what we have to do when it comes to spreading the pro-life message is not convert pro-choice people. It's get people who identify as pro-life, but they're not really convicted. For them to really believe abortion is the unjustified homicide of an innocent human being and ought to be treated like such in the law. Whereas when you look at the pro-choice movement, I can't imagine there's somebody who says, I'm pro-choice and I love being part of this pro-choice community. And then when they go to the ballot box, they crumple and they vote pro-life, right? If that person existed, I'd put them in like an exhibit. Like, I do a psychological case study on that person. It would be amazing to see. I mean, there's a few people who are like that. Well, no, the only liberals I know who are outspokenly say they're pro-life. People like Nat Hentoff, the late author Nat Hentoff from The Village Voice, for example, was a classic example of a Jewish atheist, civil libertarian, liberal New York journalist who was very, very pro-life. Nat Hentoff, look him up. So that's seemingly an issue. So when we talk about this issue with other people, when we talk about it, I think, honestly, one of our big moves we're going to have to do is just make sure getting the people who identify as pro-life that they really are convicted and they'll carry that conviction to ballot proposals, to voting between candidates, understanding that you should not vote for a candidate. Voting for a candidate who thinks the unborn are not people should be as repugnant as voting for a candidate who thinks black people aren't people or indigenous people aren't people. People ask that, would you vote for a pro-abortion candidate? I say, why would I vote for somebody who thinks a group of people aren't people? Why would I do that? I remember this came up back in 2009, people asked me about that. Would you vote for Obama? Would you vote for a pro-abortion candidate? I said, I wouldn't vote for him because he doesn't believe the unborn are people, just like I wouldn't vote for someone who thinks Obama's not a person, or doesn't have basic rights. Why would I do that? So I think that's what we're going to have to focus on moving forward, is taking into account our culture and the fact that there are many people who identify as pro-life, but they're very lukewarm in that regard. They see abortion as a tragic social issue. I think, honestly, if you looked at there are lukewarm pro-lifers and the lukewarm pro-choicers, not the activists, but the people in the middle who are lukewarm about it. I think, honestly, they view the unborn as having the same value as a golden retriever, okay? They think like, you know what? Sure, it's sad, but, sometimes bad things have to happen to Marley, I guess. Or I don't want to spoil the end of the movie for anybody. I already did, so it's not a heartwarming tale, okay? Don't let the DVD box cover fool you, all right? It's sometimes Old Yeller, whatever it may be, if circumstances require it, you have to do what must be done. So they're able to say that abortion's sad, but it can also be justified for a wide variety of reasons. And so they think of abortion, it's a sad thing, and you know what? If we just voted for economic policies that help people to not feel like they need abortion, maybe that's what we should focus on instead. And so they treat abortion as a social problem rather than a moral problem, because that's what abortion is. It's primarily a moral problem. I was reading an essay from a Catholic author recently who said, well, if we took abortion seriously, we'd vote for all of these entitlement programs, full paid parental leave, entire boatload of social entitlements. And as a pro-lifer, as a Catholic, you're free to argue for that. The church doesn't have a teaching. You can agree to disagree about whether that's prudent policy. But don't act like that's going to solve the problem of abortion, because abortion's a moral problem, not a social problem. For example, you look at Sweden, for example. Sweden, everyone's saying, I wish, Sweden, they're socialists. We should be like them. Well, they're not socialists. There's more billionaires per capita in Sweden than the United States. That's where all that IKEA money goes, okay? But they do reinvest all their money into social programs. They have very, very generous paid parental leave, universal health care, all kinds of entitlement programs, okay? Sweden has a higher abortion rate than the United States. Look it up. And of course, there's other countries that have higher and lower abortion rates based on, it's hard to determine what will make abortion rates high or low based on countries, population, demographics, culture. It's a complicated question. But that is not a silver bullet to the problem. It's not purely a social problem, okay? Just like theft is not purely a social problem. You see, there are cities that have rampant shoplifting epidemics, right? And cities that don't. Now, is the cities that don't are really rich and people don't feel like they need to shoplift? No, there's probably towns around here that are relatively poor, but people can leave their doors unlocked and nobody feels worried about that. And yet there's other places in the country where actually the median income is higher, but you have rampant shoplifting epidemics, property crimes. Why? Because in those places, those acts are not treated actually as criminal acts. Like in California, you can steal up to $950 worth of stuff out of a store and it's still a misdemeanor. So what do you think when people think, the government doesn't think it's a big deal, I shouldn't think it's a big deal either? And people will think that about abortion. Well, if it's not illegal, it couldn't be that big of a deal. The state doesn't think it's a big deal. The church, I don't see people out here protesting it. That's why 40 Days for Life is so important. If it were really bad, somebody would be here to tell me to not do this. So that's what we're up against. And so when we speak about the issue, it's vitally important, we always get the issue back to the one question that matters most. There is one question. It's not about social programs, not about poverty, it's not about choice. It's about one question: what are the unborn? What are the unborn? If the unborn are not human beings, then abortion needs no justification. Who cares? Have as many abortions as you want. People might have their own personal views about it, like you have personal views about liposuction or something like that, but you're not going to try to outlaw it. But if the unborn are human beings, then abortion cannot be justified. And that's what we always have to get back to. But the problem is, a lot of times we get sidetracked, talking about religion or politics, economic policy. Why aren't you voting for this person that'll help the poor who are seeking abortions? All of this stuff. What about illegal abortions? What about poverty? What about all these other issues? And that gets us sidetracked. So we need to remember that when someone says abortion ought to be legal because, almost always it's what I call an off-topic reason. So when someone says abortion ought to be legal, I divide the reasons into two categories: on topic and off topic. And you should listen to that when you hear someone explain why abortion should be legal. Is it an on-topic reason or an off-topic reason? An on-topic reason answers the question, what are the unborn? It'll say, well, abortion ought to be legal because, a fetus isn't viable. It's a clump of cells. It's not a human. Now, they're wrong, but at least they're on topic. At least they're talking about what the unborn are. Good, let's talk about that. But off-topic reasons have absolutely nothing to do with that question, what are the unborn? That's the majority of the reasons you'll hear. They're off-topic. Some women should have a right to choose, right to privacy. What about abortion in the case of rape? What about freedom of religion? What about all of these different issues? They don't answer the question, what are the unborn? So that's how we know they're off-topic. So how do we get from an off-topic reason to an on-topic reason? Well, we use a technique my friend Scott Klusendorf from the Life Training Institute developed called Trot Out a Toddler. When I spent time at Justice for All, we developed Trot Out a Toddler into a four-step method to remember. We call it the 4 A's: agree, apply, ask why, and ah. Agree, apply, ask why, and ah. So how does that work? I'll give you a real life example of this. When I was at the University of California in Berkeley, a very tolerant, open-minded campus. No, I got there, they protested. They had a huge riot when Ben Shapiro showed up a few weeks earlier. And then I got there and there was nothing, and I felt kind of bad about myself. I was not a single overturned dumpster or flaming trash can. I just walked around, nobody knows who I am, all right, fine. And I did a debate on the issue of abortion, and in the Q&A, a young woman asked me, Mr. Horn, what about a woman in a really poor country? She has 2 kids, she's pregnant, she can barely feed the 2 kids she has now. Shouldn't she be able to have an abortion? Now, we get off topic. As pro-lifers, we lose when we stop trying to answer the question, what are the unborn? What about international adoption? What about foreign aid? What about this? What about that? Well, you're not adopting these kids, and you slashed foreign aid spending, and we get distracted. We lose if we go in that way. But we want to get back to the question, what are the unborn? How do we get there? Agree, apply, ask why, and ah. So I said to this young woman, I agree with you, that is a really difficult position to be in. I am not sure what I would do in that situation. That's really hard. So, why am I wasting my time agreeing? Well, my friend Steve Wagner put it this way. If people will not think the unborn are human until they first see you and I are human. People will not see the unborn are human unless they first see you and I are human. If we're unable to empathize with the concern someone has, they're just not going to listen to us. They're going to think we're an ideologue, that we are inhuman in our ideology. So we should empathize and find any kind of common ground, even if it's trivial. Agree and then apply. Apply always works the same way. You just say, imagine I have a 2-year-old here and his mother, and insert whatever the off-topic reason was for abortion to killing the 2-year-old. Should she be allowed to kill him? So I said to this young woman, okay, so you're saying a pregnant woman in a poor country, let's say she has a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old and she's pregnant, can barely feed the 2 kids. Well, what if she just killed the 2-year-old? The newborn would be a lot easier to take care of. Why can't she just do that? Should she be allowed to do that? And she said, well, no, of course not. She shouldn't be allowed to do that. Agree, apply. Who remembers the next step? Ask why. You don't want to just pounce on it. You want the person to come to the conclusion for themselves. Come to the conclusion for themselves. Say, okay, I agree. It's wrong. They should not be allowed to do that. But why not? Just humor me. Why not? Why shouldn't she be allowed to? If she thinks she needs that to support her family, to live her life, why shouldn't she be allowed to kill a 2-year-old? Well, it's already born. It's viable. It's breathing. It's dependent. It's murder. Okay, so that's the issue. Agree, apply, ask why. What's the last step? Yeah, you can go, that's the issue. You probably shouldn't do that. It's a little pretentious, but we needed a 4th A, and we were we're kind of out. So you might say something like, oh, okay. So that's the issue then. It's not about poverty. Because you and I agree, we don't kill 2-year-olds. People don't kill 2-year-olds to resolve the problem of poverty because they're human beings. So if the unborn are equally as human as a 2-year-old, we shouldn't kill them either. Well, they're not human. It's a fetus. Okay, let's talk about that. But notice this is good. We've made progress in the conversation because we're not talking about poverty, adoption, political issues. We're just going back to the one question that matters most. What are the unborn? And we want to get there. We want to get away from off-topic reasons and get to on-topic reasons. So women have a right to choose. I agree. Women should have lots of choices they were denied in the past. And I'll apply. Well, imagine I have a 2-year-old here. Should his mother have the right to choose to kill? Let's say that her husband leaves her and she loses her job and she thinks she's going to be horribly depressed her whole life if somebody else raises this child that's not her. So she just wants to kill her 2-year-old. It's more humane. Should she be allowed to do that? No. Agree if I ask why. Well, why not? Well, because it's a human being. Okay, so that's the issue then. She shouldn't have the right to choose to kill a 2-year-old. If the unborn are equally human, you shouldn't have the right to choose to kill them as well. And when we agree, we can also agree for the sake of the argument. Okay, we can agree for the sake of the argument. So I remember once there was a guy who would send me these emails once every 3 months through the contact form on my website, just saying it's embarrassing to be Catholic, world's overpopulated, we need abortion, Randy. And he just sent the same message every 3 months. One time I was on Catholic Answers Live, our call-in radio show, and we got a call from a Randy in Canada. And we go to the caller and he says, must be embarrassing to be Catholic, world's overpopulated, we need abortion. And I was like, Randy, you are a real person, I can't believe it. It's really you. And I said, you know what, I'll agree with you, Randy, let's just agree for the sake of the argument that the world is overpopulated, there's too many people. Or you can make a trivial agreement and say, I agree there are places in the world where there's lots of people. There are parts of the world that are overpopulated. I think we could agree with that. There's some places that have a population density too high for resources to manage. That's not true of the whole earth. It's true of a few places in the earth. So now if you did try a toddler, you could just do a basic one. You agree and then say, but imagine I have a 2-year-old here. Should we kill that 2-year-old to ease overpopulation? No. Why not? Because a 2-year-old's a human being. Oh, so we don't kill 2-year-olds to ease overpopulation. We shouldn't kill the unborn either. So if you're doing the method at the beginning, it's sort of like learning a musical instrument. When you do a musical instrument, you have very basic songs at first, hot cross buns. Do them over and over again. Then when you get that, you can improvise. So when you know the method well, you can improvise. So I improvised with Randy. I said, look, Randy, let's agree the world's overpopulated. But let's say not enough women choose abortion. So I picked a different apply. Should women be forced to have abortions if not enough women choose abortion? Or should we sterilize women if too many people are procreating? And he said, well, no, you can't do that. And I said, well, why not? He said, because you can't violate people's rights even if it's dealing with overpopulation. So I said, okay, so Randy, if we shouldn't force someone to have an abortion to deal with overpopulation, how is it just to force a person to be aborted for the same reason? And the line kind of went pretty quiet after that point. So, but notice it's a similar principle. Apply. Take the reason, apply it to the killing or the violation of a born person. No, we don't do that. Why not? Because they're a human being. Okay, that's the issue. They're human beings. And now we get back to the main issue. And what we want to do here is we want to show, and I show this more at length in my book, Persuasive Pro-Life. I won't go through everything here, but I want to go through just the big points. We basically just want to show the unborn are biological human organisms. From biology, there's a very small biological human being. And from philosophy, there's no morally relevant difference between you and I and unborn children. So biologically, my friend Steve Wagner had a wonderful soundbite he called the 10-second pro-life apologist. He said, if it's growing, it must be alive. If it has human parents, it must be human. And human beings like you and me are valuable, aren't we? So we want to show the unborn are alive, they're human, and they're a whole organism. So if it's growing, it must be alive. I was watching, I'll have an episode of my show, Council of Trent, coming out on Monday. There was a video of Charlie Kirk debating a bunch of college students on abortion. And I gave my commentary on that. And one of the women there said the fetus, it's not even alive. And I'm like, what are you talking about? If it's not alive, then you don't even need abortion. Right? What's the whole point of abortion? If it's not alive, then you don't need abortion. If something is growing by cellular reproduction, it's by definition alive. If it has human DNA and human parents, it's human. And the unborn are whole organisms. The words embryo and fetus refer to stages of development in the life of an organism. All right? It's not like skin cells or sperm or egg. Those are body parts. If you give them any amount of nutrients, put them in any environment for unlimited time, they will always be skin cells, sperm, and egg. But a human embryo, fetus, infant, toddler, child, adult, you give them nutrients, the right environment and time, they have the capacity to grow and develop until something happens that results in the death of their body, their death of them as an organism. So we can show, look, this is a human organism. Scientists don't disagree with that. And yeah, the unborn are different than us, but those differences are not morally relevant. The philosopher Stephen Schwartz summarized this in the acronym SLED, S-L-E-D, SLED. What are the differences? The first would be size. You know, a human embryo, or at 4 weeks, size of a grain of rice, an embryo might be the size of the eye on a dime. How is that a person? I agree, the difference is there, but why does that, so just always ask, why does that matter? When someone says it's not a person because of X, ask, why does that matter? Why? So what, they're smaller. Well, how big do you have to be a person? A premature infant might be 5% of my size, but they are not 5% of my value. Well, level of development, they can't think or feel like us. Why does that matter? And you'll notice with thinking and feeling, the bar either gets set too low or too high. If somebody says, well, look, to be a person, you got to be able to feel pain and be aware. And first trimester unborn children, we could say, at least the first trimester, are not consciously aware. You can say, oh, let's say if you disagree with that, at least agree for the sake of the argument. Because even if they were aware, even if they felt pain, that wouldn't be an argument against abortion. Dogs and cats feel pain. You just euthanize them painlessly. Even if the unborn felt pain, people would still argue for abortion. They'd just say, well, we'll just do a little anesthetics. Yeah, right. It's still humane. So it doesn't, that's almost a red herring. People, that's not going to end the debate there. But to say that they don't feel pain, they're not aware, embryos certainly are not. Okay, so feeling pain makes you a person. That puts the bar too low. Non-human animals feel pain. They're aware of the outside world. They're sentient. You got to pick a very unsympathetic animal. Does that make dogs and cats people? Oh, dogs are like people. Dogs are better than people. No, they're not. Dogs are better than crummy people, but they're not better than people. I have rarely ever had someone at my home who pees on my carpet and just looks at me. They act like, what did I do? No, okay? So the pet people, my goodness. I actually have another podcast coming out soon called What's the Real Problem with Childless Cat Ladies? Childless cat people, non-misogynist, and I clarified in the episode. So I think both of those actually come out next week. You can go check that out, Council of Trent, on YouTube. How about rats or pigeons, which are just flying rats? Rats are very smart. Rats can solve mazes. But if you fumigate a barn with rats, are you a mass murderer? No. But rats are pretty smart, so it's not just feeling pain, it's not even having rudimentary maze-solving intelligence. They'll say, well, okay, fine, to be a person, you gotta think rationally, like a human, only a human can do. Great. The bar was too low and you made rat-killing murder, or the bar is too high and now no infant would be a person. And the most consistent pro-choice advocates, people like Peter Singer, do say that. Peter Singer has once said, pro-life advocates are right about one thing. He said that there is no relevant difference between a late third trimester fetus and a prematurely born human infant. He said there's no relevant difference. He said where pro-lifers are wrong, however, is that pro-lifers say we ought to treat the fetus like an infant, and I say we ought to treat the infant like a fetus. So, and he has defended infanticide. And there's other bioethicists that defend this, and you have it slowly coming down the pike under the guise of, well, if an infant's born and it's non-viable, even if it has treatable illness or congenital condition, we're not gonna provide that child care. We're gonna let that child die. So that's S, size, L, level development. Some people might say, well, it's not just that. It's that when they're that small, when they're that undeveloped, they're not even in the world yet. Okay, well, what planet are they on? That's the E in SLED. The E is environment. They're not born yet. So what? If I walk 8 feet, I don't stop being a person. How does traveling 8 inches down the birth canal make someone a person? Your location doesn't change your value. Well, it's not just that. It's that when they're in the woman's body, they're totally dependent on her. So she gets to decide. That's actually 2 variant arguments. One is that if you're totally dependent on another person to live, you're not a person. Why in the world should I believe that? Why should I believe that? Imagine you're at a swimming pool and you think you're alone, and as you leave, you hear a splash and a 2-year-old has fallen into the pool and is drowning. He's totally dependent on you to live. But he didn't stop being a person in virtue of his dependency. So viability is just saying this is when a human being is at their highest level of helplessness. Why should that show that they aren't actually a person? I debated a college student once who said, well, it can't survive outside the womb, so it's not a person. I said, his name was like Greg. I said, Greg, a fetus lives in a completely aqueous environment. It's just water. Like, you couldn't survive where the fetus lives. Maybe from his perspective, you're not a person. And he was like, that's deep, man. But just put it that way. So size, level of development, environment, degree of dependency, SLED. There's differences between us and the unborn, but we want to show what are the unborn? They're just smaller, less developed human beings or more dependent on their mothers. But that doesn't mean they're not human beings with the same basic right to life you and I have. And some people will just bite the bullet at this point and say, yeah, it is a baby. I don't care. Women have the right to do what they want with their bodies. And here, I think we have to just gently shame people. We should say, so are you saying just might makes right? Are you saying that powerful people have the right to kill weak people? Okay? Are you saying that one human being can treat another human being however they want? What do we call that? Are you saying it's slavery? I didn't say this word, you did. But that's what you're arguing for. And I think that's just a barbaric way to live. It's not the kind of world I want to live in. It's the world you want to live in. And so here, when it gets to the point where it's no longer about arguing about what the unborn are, we agree they're babies, but one side says, I'm fine killing babies, then we just have to go from being a philosopher to being a prophet, to say, that is monstrous. Now, if someone might say they're not babies and we're having a philosophical debate, as much as that can be, then we can dialogue. But if it gets to the point where, yeah, it is a baby, I don't care about if babies are killed, then go from philosopher to prophet. Don't scream your head off, but you can tell people that is an uncivilized, barbaric way to live. And frankly, I think it's shameful you would say something like that. Absolutely degrading, absolutely shameful. You'd believe something. So, you have to just walk the line here. You don't want to be too milquetoast. You also don't want to figuratively or literally bite people's heads off. You'll make that judgment call for yourself. Honestly, though, a lot of people that I engage, I think that they're against abortion for what they would call birth control, but they just want it for hard cases. And so they will vote for unlimited abortion just to make sure the hard cases are covered. And so I think that's a problem we have to address and help people to see, to overcome. To help them see that even if cases where the life of the mother is in danger, all 50 states have exceptions. That's a lie when the pro-abort movements say that's not true. There's an exception in all 50 states, not even just for a woman's life, but even if there's serious irreversible harm to like a major bodily function, physical health, real physical health. What about in cases of rape or incest, though? Here, a lot of pro-lifers stick their foots in their mouths. They'll say, oh, well, it's only like less than 1% of abortions. Well, if it happens to you, it doesn't feel like just 1%. I recommend starting with empathy to say that's horrible. And what makes rape such an awful crime is not just the crime, but in our society, women are often blamed for it. They're victim blamed. People say, well, why are you out with this person? Why are you in this part of town? Why were you drinking? Why are you doing this? When the criminal should be held 100% responsible for his crime. To tell people, yeah, it's awful. Victims of rape, they're victimized in multiple levels. In some countries, victims of rape can be executed. It's called honor killing. In countries of Muslim Sharia law, you can be executed for being a victim of rape. Would you and I agree that's awful? In this country, we don't even execute rapists. So we could say to the person, would you agree if it's unjust to execute the victim of rape, if we don't even execute the rapist, why would we execute the other innocent party? Can you help me see that doesn't make sense? Well, what about the trauma that's involved? I say, well, look, I might ask the question, can you make a person unraped? No, there's nothing that can do that. There is a trauma that happens here, and it's a trauma that one must heal from. It's a trauma that cannot be undone. And I could ask the person, do you think we should answer that trauma by making her body be the site of another trauma, the death of her own child within her womb? How healing do you think that will be? So I think that notice here, and then you might talk about how, look, this is only also for very, very rare cases. Are you okay in trying to make abortion legal for those cases, ending up with abortion in the 7th, 8th, 9th month of pregnancy, which does happen? I have a recent episode that came out that shows pro-aborts who say that doesn't happen are lying or ignorant. Check out that episode of my podcast for more on that. But I think, but notice there, I led with empathy. I didn't just go into fact mode. And that's what people need to hear from us. So empathy, focusing on the question, what are the unborn? And then ultimately what we need to do is we have to act like the unborn really are human beings. As pro-lifers, we don't always act like that. I don't think that's a moral fault. Like if we actually acted like abortion, what it truly was, like I think we would just have a psychic breakdown. We'd just be in the fetal position, no pun intended, crying every day. Like the way we have to deal with this is sort of like how emergency medical professionals, coroners, emergency room ERs, police officers, people who deal with violence and death on a daily basis, they tend to develop gallows humor, a macabre sense of humor. They also become desensitized to the trauma, the violence, and the death. They have to, otherwise they simply couldn't function. And we have to do, we as pro-lifers have to do that as well. And the problem is though, if we get more and more like that, we can end up not really treating the unborn as full human beings. So I think that's something we have to be on the lookout for. I'll close with this. I was once speaking with a group of high school students wearing pro-life t-shirts with pictures of unborn children on them. And I asked them, if your friend was going to kill her 2-year-old, would you tell somebody? And the student said, well, yeah, of course. And I said, if your friend was going to have an abortion, would you tell her parents? Would you tell people? And they said, well, I don't know. Like, it's really private. I don't know. And I said, guys, what's the difference between the 2-year-old and the unborn child? And this kid looked down at their shirt and they said, well, there is no difference. And these were committed pro-life kids, but it still hadn't really sunken in for them. So I think that's something we'll have to focus on, and using this approach. If you want to go deeper in it, you can check out my book, Persuasive Pro-Life. That's what I think that'll happen. And still, it'll be one conversation, planting a seed, and God will move people's hearts accordingly. He is just asking us to have those conversations, one person at a time, for the greater glory of his kingdom. So thank you all so much for having me here today.
Thank you, Trent.
Yes.
We do have a few questions here for you, so just bear with me. First question I have is, I talked to a biology student at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore who denied that, I'm not sure the word, denied that I think a fetus and an embryo were not human. What could I have done to continue and to debunk this factual error? I just stopped arguing with the biologist.
I think what you should ask them, if they say the unborn, if they say a human embryo and a human fetus are not human, you should ask him, can you define human? Please define human for me and tell me why a human embryo or human fetus are not human. I suspect what is happening there is that biologist is not using a biological definition of human. They are using a philosophical definition. And you can remind them, look, they might say, well, it's not human because it's not conscious, it's not viable, it's not this or that. Oh, you're just saying it's an unconscious human. It's a human that can't survive outside of the womb, but it's still a biological human. Ask them to define the term, and then you can see it's not a biological dispute you're having, it's a philosophical dispute.
Thank you. Next question. I am soon to give a talk and take questions at a local college. Can you give us the top 5 tough questions college students ask?
I think the top 5 questions you'll get asked, I've covered some of them already. What about abortion in the hard cases? What about abortion in the case of rape? What about abortion? What if the woman's life is in danger? What about illegal abortions? Do you want women to die from back alley abortions? You can use trotted to toddler to respond to that. So that might be the top 3 that will come out. You might have some people arguing, I don't have to donate my organs to save someone's life. Why should a pregnant woman have to donate her body to a child? And there I would just say, well, no, abortion is not like refusing to donate a kidney. It's more like donating a kidney and violently ripping it out of somebody's body and killing them in the process. I would just tell that person, just check out if you read my book, Persuasive Pro-Life, before a talk like that, you'll be equipped to handle really, and I have advanced appendices in there. It would cover 99% of what they would bring up. So.
Thank you. How do we have factual, productive conversations regarding life issues with people who reject reason but proceed from emotion?
Well, I think what's helpful is just to ask people questions. And if they're very emotional, asking a simple question can help to diffuse that or show they need to calm down before you have more of a discussion. Like just saying, look, we have common ground here. Do you agree we shouldn't violate human rights? We should protect human rights. Do you agree, yes or no with that? Ask a very basic question, even if they're emotional, they can answer to. And say, do you think all humans should have human rights? What do you think a human is? And when you ask questions, it helps them think in a logical way or try to, rather than just a purely emotional way. So I would say a Socratic approach is most helpful with someone like that.
Do you find that it is harder today to even graciously engage people who disagree with us? They simply refuse to hear anything. And how do you address the issue of overpopulation?
Oh, well, first I would say I think it's harder in some of the venues. I don't do debates on social media. I find them to be very unproductive because people, they don't talk like they normally do. I think face-to-face conversations are still as productive as they were in the past. We do have some difficulties that people are more desensitized to violence. They're more desensitized to sexual promiscuity, so they're more inclined to defend abortion. I'm going to cover this in a future episode of my show. I do think a lot of people are desensitized to violence and death. And so it can be harder for them to think abortion is really that serious of a wrong. When I was a kid, if you wanted to see dead people or gruesome things, you had to go to the independent video store and secretly get your older brother to rent a video called Faces of Death. And that was back when, and you would stay up late and after playing Risk till about 1 a.m., dude, put on Faces of Death, man. I don't think we should watch this. Oh no, man. Kyle got it for me. I promise you, okay, fine. Nowadays, though, sorry, that's my PG swearing there. I have an in-law who always says that. I love the PG-related swearing, the faux swearing around my children. But I do feel that you turn on social media, I can start scrolling on Twitter on X, and I can watch videos of people getting killed in accidents. It's absurd. And there's pornography, but not just porn, there's gore pornography. You can find death. You could just sit and you could just watch, and I know people have done this, who just get on the internet and they just start watching death on a mass scale, on the live video of this stuff. So I do think it's kind of desensitized people a lot. When we say abortion kills the unborn, they're like, who cares? I see lots of people get killed. And so I really worry about the state of humanity as it is now, where our arguments are still good. People are just losing a bit of their humanity to respond to them. So I think part of it is we have to get people to see, you're not in a great spot emotionally or spiritually if this is how you feel inside. I think that's something else we have to really address. But.
Hey, thank you. Why do you say, what are the unborn instead of who are the unborn?
Because I am engaging a person who if someone denies that the unborn are human beings, then the question is not which individual person is this entity? That'd be more like the question of who. So like, let's say we were gonna blow up a building and we see something moving in, we see something moving inside. We see movement in the building. The first question we ask isn't who is that? The question is more, what is that? Is it a human? Is it a squirrel? Was it just a trick of the light? What is that is what we're trying to figure out when we're doubting if it is even a human being at all. What is that? But if we see it's a person, when we ask, hey, who is that? So we've already assumed it's a human being, and we're trying to figure out which human being it is. So I use the sentence, what are the unborn? Because I'm asking someone who denies, like if I ask a pro-choice person, who is that? And I point to a fetus, they're like, I don't know. I don't know who that is. It's not even a who. But if I say, what is that? They got to give me an answer. What is it? If it's not human, what is it? So that's why I say, what is that versus who is that? When I'm debating someone who denies the unborn are human.
What elevator message would you say to interest college-age persons to be interested to watch a video called A Glimpse Inside, a scientific documentary about human development? And what is the 3-second message to a woman walking into a Planned Parenthood facility for an abortion?
Oof, 2 tough questions there. So the elevator pitch, I would just try to ask the person a question like, hey, how old are you? I'm 21 years old. Are you counting that? Are you sure you're 21 years old, or are you 21 years and 9 months old? Like, how small did you used to be? What's the smallest you've ever been? I don't know, I was 6 pounds when I was born. How many pounds were you the day before you were born? How about the day after? What's the smallest you've ever been? Were you ever just one cell? You might find this documentary, I find it really interesting, talking about what human life is like. And then you think, what are we doing to these human beings? When it comes to sidewalk counseling, like what to say to someone entering an abortion facility, that is not my area of expertise. So what I do is I teach people how to argue abortion is wrong. It is different than being on the front lines, encouraging people not to go into an abortion facility. People will say different things to those who come in, go in and go, I've heard different things have been offered. I can't think on the top of my head, there's like a brilliant silver bullet. It's different. I think asking maybe like, you don't really want to be here, do you? You don't have to be here today. Maybe something like that. But as I said, that's not my area of expertise. For example, I could argue about why assisted suicide should be illegal, but I'm not the person who is trained to talk to someone who is about to jump off a bridge. You need a trained crisis counselor to deal with someone in that crisis situation. I could argue in a public forum why suicide should be illegal, why assisted suicide should be illegal, but a trained counselor in a crisis situation, it's a different set of skills that are applied. And I would definitely recommend 40 Days for Life has people who have done that for many years, engage with them, and I think they can give you a lot of tips on that.
Yeah, please stop by the table, later on after the session, and I'm sure people will help you. And Monique will be able to address that too. Thank you. I actually have 2 questions here that I could address. The first is about the 4th A, and the 4th A stands for awe, correct? AH?
Yes.
And the other one is, what is the D in SLED? And if I was listening correctly, it's the degree of dependency.
That's right.
All right. Yeah. I get an A+, right?
You do, absolutely.
Next one then. What do you think is the best pro-choice argument, and why are you not convinced?
Well, the best pro-choice argument is the one that grants the most of the pro-life case. So the best pro-choice argument will say, fine, I agree, the unborn is a human being. I guess there's 2. One would say, look, a person is any individual who has the present ability to be rational. That is a person. And if you say, well, infants aren't rational, and the person says, yeah, infants aren't persons, that's very difficult to refute because it's consistent. To say, oh, well, and then I have an appendix in my book about, why that's wrong. Part of it is I just have a basic moral intuition infanticide is wrong. Now I am more convinced that infanticide is wrong then I have other basic intuitions about, just as I have a basic intuition that I'm actually here talking to you all and I didn't sleep in and I'm dreaming at the Courtyard Marriott or something. One nightmare as a public speaker, you're like, I missed the talk. You always set 3 alarms. I just have an unshakable intuition that, hey, infanticide is wrong. If someone gives me a fancy philosophical argument and at the end it says, therefore it's okay to rape women, I'm going to say, you know what? I know there's something wrong with that argument, even if I can't explain it, because I know rape is wrong, and you can't convince me otherwise. And I would say the same about infanticide. And I have other philosophical arguments, though, in my book where I go more in depth to show that pro-infanticide arguments don't work. They fail to address the nature of the human person. For example, that if somebody suffered a brain injury and could be restored to consciousness, if we allowed their brain just to heal itself, we would consider them a person. And yet that's the same position a fetus or an infant is in. Their brain just has to keep developing for them to first attain consciousness. And then the other one might be the organ donor argument I gave earlier. Like, well, I don't have to give my organ to somebody else to make them live. Why should a pregnant woman be forced to? And I show that no, it's not the same. When somebody needs my kidneys, I'm not the cause of it. I'm not the reason they need my kidneys. I'm not related to it. And my kidneys aren't made for somebody else's body, so they don't have a natural right to them. But the uterus is made for somebody else, and that person it's made for probably has a natural right to reside in it when they're created. So.
Speaking from an atheist worldview, why should they care? Everyone in their lives can be seen as insignificant particles. Why not just do what they feel? How would they even grasp morality?
Well, there's different atheists who have different answers to this question. I know there are pro-life atheists who say, well, this is the only life you get, so that's why I'm pro-life. You only get one life. So, and there are atheists, though, who are nihilists that don't care about anything. There's some like that. But many atheists would say, well, look, yeah, my life is an accident, but I can still make life the best that I can. And moral rules help to make life livable, so we should promote moral rules. So they have a utilitarian aspect to it. So I think that atheists can grasp morality in some situations, but I think having objective, universal moral norms that are unchanging, I think atheists have a hard time explaining those. So when you talk about abortion, you very quickly can get to the foundations of morality, and you can talk about religious truths as well.
Good. My friends go to a very secular school in DC. They are involved at the Newman Center and do pro-life work. What are some tips to engage people at a very pro-choice secular school?
I think you have to bring the discussion to them. It's hard. If you host a talk, like if you bring me to talk there, it's going to be like 6 people, 5 of them are in the pro-life club. This has happened to me. One obligatory student journalist that writes a short, misleading review of the talk. I think you have to bring it to them. You have to do things like cemeteries of the unborn, chalk displays, photo displays, and be out there, a poll table, should abortion be legal, yes or no? And you talk to people. You have to bring it to them because they're not going to want to talk about it, and be prepared to engage them in a Socratic way.
If a pregnant woman is shot and dies, the shooter is charged with 2 murders. So legally, it is a person. How does this not transfer to a woman aborting?
Yeah, that's a great inconsistency in our legal system. That basically we will say wanted unborn children are persons and unwanted unborn children are not persons. And then we can ask, do you think wantedness should change your value? Should it change your value? And so I think some people try to defend this, though. They basically try to just say, well, the mother just gets to decide if the child lives or dies, not anybody else. And so if that's their reasoning, then you can point out how barbaric that kind of reasoning is to allow one powerful person to decide if a helpless person gets to live or not.
Thank you. I saw online someone say that abortion is considered sacred in indigenous cultures. Something about masculine duality, male, female. I can't read all of it. The uterus brings life and takes life, they said.
Yeah, okay, well, somebody says, well, abortion is important to my culture. I might say, well, protecting innocent human beings is important to my culture, so my culture wins. Sorry. I don't care. It reminds me of a British general in India. When he went there, in India, they practice sati, which is throwing, if a man dies, his widow gets thrown on top of his funeral pyre and is burnt alive. So that was happening in India, and the British colonists there, evil colonialists, they did do some evil things. I'm not like totally crazy far, off the reservation. Obviously, they did some bad things. They also did some good things. They said, well, it's our, sati, that's our culture. And the British general said, yeah, okay. The colonel said, in our culture, people who kill women, we hang them. So let every man act according to his culture then. So just because something's important to a culture, like abortion's a part of indigenous culture. So what? Part of indigenous Aztec culture was human sacrifice. If there were Aztecs here today, should they get to live out their culture? No. Sorry. Instead, you get to go in and stop it, which is why I love the movie Apocalypto, because that's where the white people ended up being the good guys. And there were some indigenous who realized that was bad, but they were running away the whole time in the movie. But Mel Gibson's Apocalypto, wonderful date night movie. I will just say right there, put it on. Watch that. No, it's about a man who loves his wife and will do anything for her and his child, and kill as many killers as possible to do that. But it makes a good point there that just because a culture believes something, it doesn't follow that it's right. And also, by the way, the people who often say this kind of stuff, if someone's culture says that abortion is wrong, contraception is wrong, as is prevalent in Africa, these same secular liberals will say they have to go in and change those cultures. So it's totally hypocritical that if cultures that believe abortion and contraception and sodomy are immoral, they would say, oh, we have to go in, we have to help those cultures. So it's totally hypocritical in that regard.
Should one of our arguments pertain to the suffering and trauma that many post-abortive women and men experience?
I think that can be a supplement to it. You don't want to make that your primary argument, that abortion is wrong because women have post-traumatic stress or regret abortions. Problem is, there's a lot of women who claim that they don't. So it's not your primary argument. It's like saying directly killing civilians in war is wrong because soldiers will have post-traumatic stress disorder after. Well, that's not why it's wrong. And there's some people who kill innocent civilians and they just don't care. Okay. And there's some who do feel really destroyed inside after doing something like that. That's not why it's wrong. But the fact that so many, if the unborn were not human beings, it's very curious so many women would feel that way. Because I don't know anybody who goes around saying, oh, I regret my appendectomy. Like, I'm a murderer, I had an appendectomy. There are people who will regret major bodily surgeries because it caused them grave harm, like people who regret so-called gender reassignment surgery. But just removing your tonsils, your appendix, I don't know anybody who thinks they're a murderer. But people think that about abortion. And if the unborn have the same value as tonsils or an appendix, that's very strange. So many people would feel that way about it. So it's a curious fact, but it's not the main case you should make.
The Holy Father recently talked about Catholics needing to choose the lesser evil when voting. How do you personally discern the lesser of evils in this upcoming presidential election?
Well, I guess if I was talking to the Holy Father, there's a few things I might say to him. I might say first, I might ask him, what's worse, murdering a person or refusing to allow them to enter your country, to non-violently remove them or refuse entry to your country? So I might ask then, don't you think one of those is a greater evil than the other? And I think that we should give a respectful ear to the Pope's prudential judgment, but it's by no means infallible. It's not even authoritative. It's a prudential judgment we should consider, but we could reasonably disagree with it. I would also say to him, if you're saying that, he used the phrase, turning away migrants is a grave sin. I said, okay, so turning away migrants is a grave sin. Well, Kamala Harris has now promised she is going to be tough on the border, and she's going to secure the border, even though in 2019 she said she should decriminalize illegal border crossings, but we're also to forget about that. But she said she's going to secure the border. So I'm asking Holy Father, okay, so you have somebody, and also the Biden administration at one point was deporting more people than the Trump administration did. So I might ask the Pope, well, Kamala Harris she's part of an administration that deported more people than President Trump did. And you yourself have even said deportations can be justified. And she believes in turning away migrants at the border. She wants to secure the border. Kamala Harris at that news conference a few years ago, and she said, I'm telling you, Central America, do not come. You didn't just fall off a coconut tree to get up here. Don't come. I mean, something like that. But she did. She told them, don't come. Turn them away. So I might say to him, well, both Trump and Harris turn away migrants. Both of them support, in some respects, deportation. But one candidate wants to make it possible to protect the unborn in a state, and the other candidate wants to make it impossible. What am I supposed to do with that? So that's the most I can say as a representative of a 501c3. You can take that with you.
Thank you. We have one final question. Discourse has gotten so coarse that any opposition to, quote, abortion at any time, unquote, no matter how respectful, is branded as, quote, religious fanatics shoving their stupidity down our throats, unquote, even if religion is not brought up at all. How are we able to even start a conversation when even the mere mention of pro-life spurs such strong emotions?
Well, you just need to call them out on it and say, well, what does this have to do with religion? I haven't brought up religion. I have an argument that is secular. It's non-religious. Human rights are important. All humans have human rights. The unborn are humans. What's religious about that? Unless you think human rights are religious, which maybe they are, but I'm sure you like human rights. I think that's what we have to call people out on that. Also, it's also hypocritical because pro-choice advocates will say, well, abortion needs to be legal because some religions believe abortion is not sinful. So they will use religion to defend legal abortion. So they allow some religions to impose their view on unborn children, but Christians aren't allowed to propose our view. So I think that we can call them out on that as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much.